This podcast was brought to you by Meros cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilizes the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to the October update of State of the Project Meros. With me, Cryptosi, and as ever, I am joined by the enigmatic developer, Kayaba. Kayaba, how are you, sir?
Great, pleasure to be here as always.
Right, now I am not going to waste any time telling people about subscribing and clicking the like button and all of those sorts of things, because we have got so much to get through and so little time. So, without any further ado, my first question for this October update is regarding Bech 32. So Meros has been updated to comply with Bech 32. I'm pretty sure we spoke about this on our very, very first Developers Corner, which was, I think, around a year ago now. But please refresh our memory. What is Bech 32 and why have you decided to use it within Meros?
So Bech 32 is a Bitcoin developed address format. If I recall correctly, it was introduced in BIP 176, which not only detailed Bech 32, but also SegWit addresses. So while Bech 32 is still applicable, SegWit in general is not. Meros has its own code base and all that. And it describes a new way to format addresses. Basically, you put a human readable part in the front. So with Meros, that's MR. With Bitcoin, it's BC. You can really set it to anything. Then you put a 1 as a visual separator. And then you have your data. So for Meros, that's a public key. For Bitcoin, it's a script. It can really be anything you want. And then finally, this is where it gets interesting. There's a checksum appended to the end. And the checksum is a special type of called a BCH code. And these allow where even if a human types in a faulty address, the BCH code can be used to figure out what the correct address is. So while no wallet software should ever, quote unquote, correct the address for their user, they should only say, hey, we think this is the problem. Can you confirm? It's very useful just to make sure that addresses are correct and offers more functionality than a hash, which cannot be reversed or used to theorize about the location of any problem. It's also all lowercase to make it easier to type off if it's being read.
That is insane. So if I type in this long address and I accidentally type in an R instead of a K, will this format then tell me, I think you meant to put K instead of R?
Right. It can do that up until there's, I think it's 3 inaccurate letters. I think that's the limit when we're talking about public keys. So yes, it can. It's just the wallet software has to support that functionality.
Wow. Okay. That is very cool. How does this fit in? I'm not sure if it was last month or the month before, but we spoke about, was it OpenCAP? And giving addresses actual names. Now, how does this fit in with OpenCAP?
So with OpenCAP, we're basically replacing addresses with what looks like email addresses. And in both cases, they decode to a public key. So with addresses, you store a public key in the data. With OpenCAP, you have an effective email address that either decodes to an address or the raw public key, which can be used in transactions. The nice thing about Meros, at least, is addresses don't exist as far as Meros is concerned. It only deals with public keys, but of course public keys are very annoying to handle as an end user. So when the end user goes to do something, they see the address, that's what they're presented with, and that's what they work with to make it all nice. So when we're working on OpenCAP, we're likely just going to have OpenCAP decode to an address, which the wallet software then has to decode to the public key. But we could have it directly decode to a public key if we want. The advantage, though, is if we decode to an address, that means you could look up the address behind an OpenCAP address and then input that address into software that doesn't support OpenCAP.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Right. The next question I wanted to ask you, it was in the GitHub. It was about saving the historical balances. This confused me a little bit, as I thought the historical balances were kind of by default saved in blockchain. So could you please explain this one for me in a little bit more detail?
When we look at blockchains and all these data structures, what we're really looking at isn't balances being saved, but we're looking at transitions. You start with 0, someone sends you 100, you spend 50, someone sends you another 75, and you end up with 125. But the blockchain, it doesn't say 0, 100, 50, 125. It saves plus 100, minus 50, plus 75. So what this, I know the commit you're referring to specifically, and it was about merit holders, where we were working with the state, an object which tracks who has how much merit. Merit being different from Meros, and merit being the token we use to weight transactions for voting and all that. We didn't save the individual balances for every merit holder at every block just because that would be very expensive and it's unnecessary. If you were to ask, what's this merit holder's balance? We would either go from the start of the chain or the end of the chain and process all transitions. This, of course, generally being done at the end of the chain because I don't think there's any scenario in which we need the state past the last 100 blocks. It really, you could probably only save the transitions in just the last 100 blocks if you wanted to. But anyways, what we were doing is we're saving the total amount of merit at each block. So generally, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, really just coinciding with how many blocks on the chain there are. But when a merit holder does something malicious against the network, they can lose their merit, in that changes things up. So this change was saving the total amount of merit in the system at every block so it could be quickly accessed.
Okay, really interesting. Okay, next question. Moving straight on. There was a commit which said something about don't finalize parents before their children. Now, obviously, as a parent, it's always nice to be put first for once, and I do actually need you to explain this one a little bit more for me.
Right, so we recently redid a lot of our transaction stack. In Meros, when we were working on this, we had 2 DAGs in place. We had a transactions DAG and a consensus DAG. And the transactions DAG had a bug in it. You send 3 sends in a row. So you create 3 independent send objects, which feed into each other. So create one send, which is used as the input in the next send, which is used as the input in the next send. Meros wouldn't add them due to the way we handled transactions. It would only create sendable outputs once the transaction was confirmed. That said, all 3 of those transactions are potentially valid and all of them should be handled. And it was actually a pretty big bug for us, which was actually pointed out by a community member. It just wasn't something I'd written tests for yet. So we had to redesign the transactions tag to not care about the consensus whatsoever. It doesn't matter whether or not the transaction is verified. It doesn't matter whether or not if parents are verified. Transactions are transactions. As long as the transactions are valid from the amount in and the amount out in the format, add them to the database. So as we did this, we moved transaction verification over to the consensus tag. The consensus tag was now responsible for keeping track of consensus, rather than a half and half system we had at the time with transactions. So as consensus was taking full responsibility instead of just partial, it said if a transaction got enough weight behind it, I believe the threshold we were working with at the time was 80%. If it has 80% of the weight behind it, mark it as verified. The issue is that you have to have the parents verified first. If you create a send, which is used as inputs in another send, the child, quote unquote, send cannot be valid, even if it gets the majority of weight, if the parent isn't. Because if the parent isn't verified, then those outputs don't exist. So the child can't be valid. And that's what we were working on. We were working on making sure the parents had been all tallied up and properly accounted for before we handled their children.
With children being able to be verified first, would that be a way for people to possibly double spend?
Exactly, if that was allowed. You could create 2 transactions, get the child verified, which means you did successfully send funds, but then if the parent wasn't verified, you spent funds that should never exist. So you didn't actually send the funds that were then successfully sent. So you got back your funds and sent the funds.
Yep. And that is dangerous. That would mess with the total supply and all sorts. Really,
we weren't considering malicious action. We were considering the fact that if you see just the child send, you won't think if you code verifications improperly. Like if you're a merit holder and you're verifying stuff and whoever coded the verifier did it improperly, it could look at the child transaction, see that there's no competing transactions in play, and verify it. But then if the parent does have competing transactions and it happens to lose, that's why you have to check it for it. We're not concerned about anyone being malicious. We just need to make sure everything is handled properly.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. All right. Okay, good. So parents come first. Excellent. Another reason for me to support Meros. Right. So this was a really interesting one for me. It's a word that has just popped up and seems to have been taking the Meros GitHub by storm. The word is liver. Looking through the code and trying to understand what little I can, it seems to be a new class. I hope I'm right. Is liver a new class? What does it do? Because it does seem very important.
I'm happy you pronounced it correctly because, traditionally it would be pronounced liver, but no, that's how I personally pronounce it. I pronounce it liver. Right. So when we're working with...
Well, let me just say in the UK, there's a really terrible city called Liverpool. Terrible city, terrible football team as well, by the way. And they have these two birds on their crest, and the birds are called liver birds. So I don't know where the word liver comes from, but that's how I knew it wasn't the word liver, even though it's spelled exactly the same.
Well, I can't comment on your animosity towards Liverpool. What I can say is we had a class in our Python test week called Syncer. And it was basically, here's a blockchain with this data that does this stuff. It has this consensus elements, or these consensus elements, and has these transactions. Feed it to the node and verify it's handled. Verify that it sends the same data back, that it processes it correctly, that it doesn't find any problems, so on and so on. And that's what Syncer does. And then we needed a counterpart to it. If we need to verify not only that Meros can sync the data, but also handle it in real time, we need to send it in real time. And we couldn't use Syncer for that because that used the proper sync mechanism. So we needed to create a class called liver. And this really just helped us make our test a lot smaller. I think one of them was we had 180 lines between two of them, with only about 180 lines each for two of them, with only 10 lines different, because they each just had a very subtle change in how they sent the data, with both being valid yet causing different results. And due to the fact we're doing live messages, we're not just syncing it, there were problems creating a successful liver class. But we were able to design a way that made it work for the test, and we've really just made the test a lot smaller, a lot more compact, a lot more compatible, a lot more, or just easier to read, because they're all just using the same code now. And only the explicitly different actions are actually written out, with all the stuff that's shared between every test being outsourced.
What prompted you to create this class? this liver class. Have you seen what I'm trying to get at is, have you seen it implemented in someone else's tests? Where did the creativity come from?
I haven't read through too many existing cryptocurrency test suites like Bitcoin or so on. I just knew that I had to edit one of our tests, and I was quite frustrated with how hard it was to find what I wanted to edit, to properly edit it, to make sure that wasn't changing the flow. Not because it couldn't be done, but just because it took a little bit extra effort that I feel like it shouldn't have. And because that was the state for most of our tests, I wanted to build something to make it better.
Okay, I understand. All right. Okay, next question I really wanted to speak about, privacy. Now, I've heard it through the grapevine. I can't tell you where my sources are, who my sources are, because it's cosmic top secret, but I've heard that there is a rumor that you are considering adding amount privacy to Meros. Now, could you explain what amount privacy is, and is the rumor true?
I'd be surprised if your sources are just our public Discord. We've been discussing it a lot over there recently. So about a week ago, I want to say, I was sent a demo for amount privacy, and something that could easily apply to Meros, just a few hundred lines of code. And amount privacy is just, if I send you money, you don't know how much, or everyone else doesn't know how much I sent. The amount is private. Only the sender and the receiver are known. So the advantages to that is just, it's more privacy, it's more security. You shouldn't be forced to share that info with the public. But the disadvantages are the fact that exchanges aren't listing a lot of privacy coins. And this has also been affecting a lot of coins that are now forking CryptoNote, which is apparently the next hot thing, instead of just forking the usual old Bitcoin, where they're struggling to get listed, except for on really, really bad exchanges, because the big ones, the legit ones, they are staying clear of privacy ones due to legislation. Not necessarily targeting privacy coins, but making sure that you know who you're dealing with, and you do KYC and know where the funds are from, so on and so on. So that's why I don't plan to add privacy to Meros just within the first few months, along with the fact that privacy is evolving way too fast. We saw Zero Coin broken, a month or two ago, and then the original Bitcoin coin to add it has already had their new privacy mechanism launched, and they're planning their next one. The electric coin company, the group behind Zcash, continuously releasing new papers on ZK snarks. Privacy is moving a lot. So to add something that's going to be dated in a few weeks to a few months and would harm Meros' adoption, I can't commit to that at launch. I definitely want to revisit it 6 months to a year in. But I will say CTs are especially nice because they've been around for years. They're highly secure, if not, I don't want to say completely, nothing's completely secure, but they're secure as hell. And because they only offer amount privacy, the speed up or the slowdown isn't horrible. If everyone used private transactions, it would lower our TPS by 18 times. So that's bad, but compared to the other privacy mechanisms out there, it doesn't require a trusted setup. And because the sender and receiver are still public, it could still be approved by exchanges because they're concerned with where the funds came from. So this would still provide a history of the funds, but only the exchange would be able to see the amount. So they still have all the info relevant to them. That said, again, there's the 18 times slowdown. Privacy is evolving fast. And there's the fact that it only hides the amount. A lot of coins are interested in receiver and sender and amount privacy. And that's something I fully respect. I believe it's people's right to be private. I just can't concede that that's the right move for Meros at launch. And it's definitely something I want to look into for the next set of hard forks.
That is, thanks for that answer. That's a very comprehensive response. I wasn't really expecting that much. It's how worried are you about the current landscape of crypto with this, it can only be called uncertainty as to what will be allowed in the future and what won't be allowed? Let's say, hypothetically, if there wasn't the slowdown, if the slowdown was so small, it was pretty much irrelevant, would you, on the uncertainty alone, not add a feature like privacy, on the uncertainty alone that it may privacy coins may be banned in the US, which is where everybody's mostly worried about it? Would you put the feature on hold for that reason alone?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
There was a surefire privacy mechanism, something that hid at least the amount, and even better, also the sender and receiver, but not just the sender and receiver. If it doesn't have amount privacy, I'm not too interested, to be honest. If it only offered a slowdown on the scale of 5 or so instead of 18, and it didn't require a trusted setup, even if Exchange wouldn't like it, no, I would add it. You can't turn down a technology like that, because if you do, you're going to be left behind. If enough coins became privacy coins, then exchanges would be forced to either adapt or shut down. So even now, when we're talking CTs, I think it would be great to add them as an optional feature. You know, within 6 to 12 months, if you can create CT transactions, or you can create regular transactions. And that at least gives the choice. The problem with choices like that is most users won't bother doing CT transactions, and because most users don't bother, the amount that's private remains quite low, and because of that, it's easy to say, this person created 50 private Meros, this person got 50 private Meros, and then converted them to 50 clear Meros. Therefore, this person sent to this person. So, just because of choices crippling privacy just by offering a low pool, something that even Zcash has problems with. I think like 0.5% of their transactions are private to private. Honestly, it's just a very complicated landscape. If I was handed an amazing privacy mechanism that was a surefire in every way, no, I would not hesitate to add it.
Okay, it's just finding that balance, I guess, is what you're
exactly. And I do believe within 6 months to a year, Meros is more likely than not likely to have some sort of privacy added, not just through second layers. Because once we're more established, we have the time to review this code, we have extra time to write it, we're not just trying to get a mainnet up. I do believe privacy would be a great feature, and I believe there's great things to do with human rights, which include privacy. And I would love to add CTs, which have been around for years. The question is just, is CT the best mechanism? And do we have that range before mainnet? And no, I don't think that's the best option for us. But I think 6 months to a year from now, that's going to change a lot, and we're definitely going to be more likely than not likely to have some sort of privacy.
This privacy that was discussed in public in the Discord, which I attempted to claim was one of my confidential private sources. This privacy, has it been used in any other projects, or is it something that currently only exists as a white paper so far?
CTs specifically?
Specifically the type of CTs that were going to be put into Meros.
So CT stands for confidential transactions. If I recall correctly, CT were initially proposed in 2012, 2013 as a Bitcoin soft fork, the same way Zero Coin was proposed as a Bitcoin soft fork. They were the basis for a lot of CryptoNote coins before they moved on to Ring CT, which is CTs plus sender and receiver obfuscation. So we're looking at the bulletproof method specifically, just for the faster speeds and small proofs, but even that's been around for a year or two by now, I think.
Okay, so it's not so much of a generic term. I thought it was a generic term, but it's an actual technology. I'll tell you what I may do is put a link to it in the description once I've researched it properly. But thank you for that. let's move on. Community questions. So luckily this month we got a community question from the always available Luke Apton, I believe his name. Well, that must be his project, Luke Apton. And the question is, could you summarize the upcoming protocol changes?
So recently I made a push involving a different protocol, and it changed a decent amount. And I added a description that wasn't meant for developers, was meant for people. I meant what was in it. It basically said, I'm not happy with the existing Meros protocol. It's great. I think a lot of other developers would be happy with if they built it, but I'm not happy yet. So our existing consensus DAG, it had every merit holder have their own blockchain, like Nano does with the block lattice. It was a block lattice. And every merit holder, so let's say you and me are merit holders. You get Cryptosi 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, so on. You get Kayaba 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, so on. And when the blockchain archived the consensus DAG, which is the purpose of the blockchain, to archive the consensus DAG, to mint merit, and to mint Meros. It just included Cryptosi 5, Kayaba 3. It just included the last index. And the index weren't actual numbers. They're not hashes or anything. They're just numbers. And the problem with that was I wanted to add a verification for you, Cryptosi, for transaction X. It would be Cryptosi number 5, verification for transaction X. Here's my signature, or your signature, and it would be the same for me. And I would pick my own number, just next available. And this means that every single transaction would have multiple signatures in its votes. If it's just the two of us, that means every transaction is going to have 2 signatures for all its votes. If there's 10 verifiers who verify transaction X, there's going to be 10 signatures to verify, so on and so on. So one of the most advantageous things we could have done to that protocol, and I was planning to do this down the road, and I still am to a point, is even though there's 10 people voting on the same transaction, only produce 1 signature instead of 10. It's kind of like what we do in blocks. When every block comes by, we combine every single signature for the past 10 minutes into a single signature in the block. But this isn't doing it every 10 minutes for a block. It's doing it for every transaction, specifically for that transaction. And that means instead of having to verify 10 signatures for 10 votes, you verify 1 signature for 10 votes. It was just really a positive speed up that would help. The issue was it couldn't be done with the protocol. I tried and tried to think of a way where we could shoehorn it in. Whether it be we list verifier index, then hash. But the thing is because those signatures then have to be aggregated together for the block signature in 10 minutes, it just could not be done no matter how I looked at it. And that means to enable this major speed up, which really would have helped, I was going to have to destroy the consensus DAG in a hard fork. But if I were to disable the entire consensus DAG in a hard fork, we would still have to support that consensus DAG for the entire lifetime of Meros. Because I built it and it was there at launch, it would have to remain, even if it can no longer be added to. Even if it was disabled and replaced, it would be years of technical debt because it was used at one point and is part of the blockchain. And I looked at it and I said, I can't do it. I'm not going to give this project years of technical debt when we can make the edits now and solve this. When we can enable a faster system and a better system at that. So for the past, I want to say week, I have deleted most of the consensus tag and replaced it with a new system where people have verifications. They verify transactions, and verifiers can get together to create verification packets, which are all their verifications for the same transaction with a single signature. And it's not going to be used at mainnet. Well, nodes can still produce verification packets on their own. It's not like it requires verifier participation. At launch, merit holders are still going to publish standard verifications. And then at the next hard fork or a year down the line, we'll look at getting merit holders to publish verification packets only instead of individual verifications. But it's a change we had to do to avoid years of technical debt. Should be done in a couple weeks, but just had to be done to make Meros quality, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree. Remind me that on our next podcast that we should speak more about technical debt, and a certain amount of technical debt is kind of inevitable. Technology moves on, so there's going to be things you're going to want to move to in the future that simply don't exist at the moment. So in our next podcast, I'd really like to speak to you in more depth about technical debt, but we are running out of time, so I'm going to have to push on.
You could say that the Liver class was kind of just related to technical debt. We had a lot of copy-pasted test code, and we were able to clean that up into a single file and outsource it for every single test.
Yeah, and it does that's just proof of how much of a big difference these things can make.
We do work on making clean code, and we have refactored as needed.
Nice, very nice. Tri-weekly updates recently, I believe it came out in the last few days, but when I was doing my research for this podcast, it hadn't yet come out, which worried me, and it kind of knocked me off balance a little bit, because I usually go through the tri-weekly update to try and see what's happening. It's another source of information. What has happened to the tri-weekly update? Is it because everyone prefers to listen to my dulcet tones over your whimsical writing, or is there something more sinister at play?
So the reason the last update instead of the usual 3 weeks is just because we had finished the transactions DAG work, where we were moving the consensus out of it into the consensus DAG. And then I had decided to remove the consensus DAG and reformat consensus. And I had written up a new protocol, and I was working on implementing it. And time just got away from me. We don't really have a dedicated person here at Meros writing these updates. I'm the one who writes them. And honestly, it's just time got away, which is why the most recent update wasn't labeled a tri-weekly update. It was just labeled update. In the past, we've done updates that are 4 weeks. We've made, I think, 60% of the time they've been actually tri-weekly. But now that this one took 5 weeks, I just said, this fixed schedule isn't working. We'll put out updates every 3 to 4 weeks, when we have news to deliver. But I don't want to be that guy that promises and then breaks his promises continuously. It's why we don't have a new mainnet date yet.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you one thing that will always be promised to be on time, like clockwork. Once a month will be the Smart Reach State of the Project Meros updates. They will be every single month, guaranteed, or your money back. Right. Last question, which is nothing really to do with the actual updates. Well, not that I noticed, but can we discuss Sporks? Now, it seems like you're not implementing them so far within Meros. Maybe there are, but I haven't seen them. What are your thoughts on using Sporks, and could you explain what they are briefly?
So Sporks are where... Okay, so there's a bit of a theory versus implementation difference here. Sporks are where a decision is made, and that decision change consensus rules from the moment of activation. So they were introduced by Dash, if I recall correctly. And basically they mean, if we were to apply them to Meros, a decision would be made to change the block time to 5 minutes. And once that decision was included in a block, say block 5,000, random number, doesn't really matter, from then on, the difficulty format would try to make every block 5 minutes long instead of 10 minutes long. And that would be an example of a spork. And I don't mind that. The problem in my mind is how that decision is made. With Dash, and every single other coin I've seen, they've always been done by a centralized party. It's generally an individual. Sometimes a few people hold the same key. There's probably one or two coins out there that like distributed parts of the key. So you have 5 people with parts and 3 of them have to agree to the spork. But it's never really been a community agreement which caused it. There's never been for Dash, you've never had like the majority of masternodes vote to enact a spork or something. And it ends up just being centralization because of that. So while I don't mind sporks in theory, I do mind centralization. And that's why I haven't even bothered adding them to Meros. Because although we could add a decentralized version, it would also require adding more of a DAO. I mean, we already somewhat have a DAO in the sense that merit holders do vote on the sended data difficulties. But I really just don't want to add that functionality because I don't see enough benefit for it at the time. If someone produces a convincing argument, a set of sporks, a decentralized way to turn them on and off, yeah, I'd definitely be open to adding them to Meros when we have the time. I don't think we're going to have that time before mainnet, though.
Interesting. See, I was always under the impression that sporks were something that they were just keys that a developer had. I didn't realize that you could have sporks be triggered in a decentralized way.
That's just because no one has implemented them like that. Because Dash did the time hack of just saying, oh yeah, here's a centralized key. And then because people accepted Dash had yet to, no one bothered to move on because no one got mad at the time and now we just live with it. So I think because no one has implemented decentralized sporks, at least that I know of, centralized sporks have become sporks. And for all I know, the original definition does define it as a centralized action. But I at least hope that the definition of spork can be decentralized, and that's how I choose to treat it, because even if sporks are by nature centralized, you can develop something exactly like sporks, but decentralized. And there's no point in saying decentralized spork and having a new term for it. It's still a spork.
They would be called dorks, wouldn't they?
No, that's the people who developed them.
Right.
No, just kidding.
I'm not saying anything. Yeah, exactly. You're going to get me into trouble now. Right, Kayaba, thank you so much. We have run over, so thank you so much for your time. As usual, a fountain of knowledge. It seems like your speaking goes from strength to strength. Thanks very much to everybody for tuning in. Next month, I know for a fact we are going to speak about technical debt and whatever else Meros has in the pipeline. Oh, which is actually a good question before I let you go, Kayaba. What sorts of things are you expecting to be working on within the next month for Meros?
Mainly just updating to the new protocol and the code-wise and not just documentation-wise. There is some interesting work with BCH codes, which we use for Bech 32, of course. But there's also some interesting work with there that we may be able to apply to the blockchain to speed that up. So I'm looking into the libraries for those as well. And then once we finish getting the consensus set up, we'll probably just move on to fixing the issues we have open, implementing send and data difficulty voting, usual stuff. Getting ready for mainnet.
Amazing. It's things are really heating up now, aren't they? So, right, thank you very much, Kayaba. Once again, thanks for giving up your time for this podcast and for keeping the Meros community informed on what's happening. And obviously, people outside the Meros community just are interested in blockchain and DAGs and consensus and all these great things. So thanks very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
No, just that was a pleasure to be here as always.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kayaba, and I will catch you in the November update. Everybody that is listening, please make sure you like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And if there are any questions that you have, don't be shy. You can join the Meros Discord. The link is always in the description. There's a State of the Project channel in there. Just pop into the channel and ask a question. Generally, everybody's pretty friendly within there. So even if you feel like the question is perhaps a bit simple, a bit basic, just throw in the question. Somebody will give you an answer, and if it's really good, we'll put it in the podcast. So, Kayaba, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening. I've been Cryptosi. This has been State of the Project Meros, and we will see you or speak to you in November. Thank you.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex, and for more information, go to www.pivex.org.